Grace and peace to you all this morning from God the Father, in the name of his Son, who's Jesus the Christ. I'd like to tell you a story this morning to begin the sermon. This happened to me a number of years ago when I was working at Shekinah full-time year-round as part of the camp staff, and I was living in the camp house. This is important to know because I lived in the upper level of the house and the office was the lower level of the building. So my commute to work was extremely short, which was good. And I pushed it a little bit because I knew I didn't have to leave myself very much time between waking up and walking down the stairs and I was at work. Hey, it had to be pretty quick. And I did, however, need to leave enough time to eat breakfast because that was important. I needed to have enough energy for the day, so I eat my breakfast. And at the time, breakfast of choice for me was oatmeal. Anybody else have oatmeal every day? No? Maybe a couple people are oatmeal eaters? Okay. So I still appreciate oatmeal, but at that time it was every day oatmeal. And I would try and mix it up a little bit. I don't load too many fillings into my oatmeal, but have to sweeten it up somehow. So sometimes I would do brown sugar and sometimes I would do honey. And at this time, I was working through a bottle of maple syrup. That was going to be my sweetener for the oatmeal. Yeah, it's a good one. I see Wayne nodding along. So here I am in the morning. I'm making my oatmeal busily over here, and I turn around to the fridge where the bottle of maple syrup is, and it comes in kind of this fancy design. It's sort of a fancy shape, but it's a plastic bottle. And it has a tiny little handle that goes off the side. And you're probably never meant to grab it by the handle. It's more just for looks. But why not? I had grabbed it by this little handle, and I was turning around in my kitchen, and it slipped out of my hand. And the bottle hits the floor. And the cap pops off, and the syrup spouts out and goes all over me. Like, I've got syrup on my head, on my shoulders, on my clothes, and I got to be at work in like 2 minutes, it's just a huge mess. There's syrup all over the kitchen, and as I'm standing there by myself in the middle of the kitchen, I notice there is syrup still dripping onto my head, drop, and I look up, and sure enough, it had hit the ceiling and was still coming down on me moments later, and I'm standing in the middle of the kitchen. I'm covered in syrup. I got to be at work in mere minutes, and there's a huge mess to clean up. And what could I just do? I started laughing. Right? It was so funny, the absurdity of the situation, that in my haste to make breakfast, I had landed myself in that spot, and no one was there to see it, but I'm sure if they would have absolutely been laughing at me. And I thought there's nothing really else to do in this moment but to laugh, and so I laughed at myself for a while in the kitchen, and then I began the process of cleaning up, and I had to take a shower and everything, and I had syrup all through my hair, and I was late for work that day, but it was a funny situation. And that's a story of just kind of laughter at the absurdity of a situation, because that's not something that happens to you or you ever expect that will happen to you, that you could be covered in something like maple syrup in your kitchen. And it includes, I would say, just a natural expression of joy in response to a humorous situation. Like, I wasn't sitting there wondering if it was funny. I wasn't sitting there really mocking myself derisively. Haha, that guy got covered in syrup. I mean, it was just funny. There was nothing I could do but crack a smile and start to laugh. And I think it reveals something of the humor of life. There was nobody there to see it, and yet it was still funny. I don't want to think of humor and comedy, let's say, narrowly. I don't want to think of that kind of thing too narrowly, like just a comedian standing up on a stage telling joke after joke. That's one way we think of comedy or humor, but that's such a narrow vision. What are the things that make us laugh? Because it happens all throughout the day. What role does laughter play just throughout our life for our perception of the world? What situations cause us to crack up laughing? And what role does laughing or humor or comedy play in our life of faith? That's a bit of a harder question. Does humor come into the life of faith at all? Today's story uses laughter as an important narrative device, and that's why I made sure sometimes if we get the verses a little wrong in the bulletin, we can just proceed with the reading as it is. But I want to make sure that Dennis read the last verses 6 through 15 as well, because that's the part where Sarah starts laughing in the story, and it's a very important part of the story. It's a narrative device that propels the story forward. And if the laughter didn't yet give it away, I think my goal for the sermon this morning is to convince you that it's because this scene is comedy. It's supposed to be funny. Okay? 3 visitors arrive at Abraham's tent under the oak of Mamre. I love this scene from the Bible. It's one of these Old Testament narratives that's wonderfully strange and just chock full of ambiguities. And I suppose that's part of what creates the humor, right? We're kind of wondering, wait, what is going on here? We have to think about it a little bit. The audience must fill in the gaps of the narrative. You can't read this story without some way imagining what's actually going on or sort of filling in some of the gaps. First of all, who are these 3 visitors, right? We don't have a background on them. But why does Abraham assume that they are greater than he? I mean, as soon as they show up, he says, "Oh, my lords, let me rush to get these things ready for you." Is it just about ancient customs of hospitality? That's just what you do when anybody wanders by your tent in the desert? Or is there something else going on? Why does the Bible switch, I wonder, mid-story? I don't know if you've noticed this. From referring from their speech of the visitors to coming from one of them to their speech as the Lord said. At first, we just have the visitors speaking, and then midway through the story, it switches to the voice of the Lord, and we're just made to assume, I guess, or to understand that they're the same thing, that the voice of the visitors speaks for the Lord. How does that even work? At what point of the story is it where we begin to see that these are not just ordinary visitors? Okay, there's a lot of things that are ambiguous about the story, and that, I think, causes us to fill in some of the blanks. How are we going to do that? Whatever the answers to those questions about the visitors themselves, Abraham, when they show up, shifts into high gear and begins doing everything quickly, in a rush, in a hurry. In verse 2, we said he ran from the entrance of his tent, then to meet the visitors. And then in verse 6, he hurried back to the tent to tell Sarah. And then in verse 7, he ran to the herd and he took a calf. And then he hurried with the servant to prepare it. He's in a rush. As I'm picturing all these scenes of Abraham going around in a hurry, I can almost hear the background track. If this was on TV, it would be something like, he's running around. It's in a hurry. It's meant to be funny. It's the rushing, bumbling servant is a kind of comedic trope. It's one of the ageless comedic tropes. Will he get it right in the end, or will there some hilarious consequences ensue? Right? That's the kind of thing that's happening here. Abraham's running around trying to please the visitors, and he gets the calf and the curds and the milk prepared. And then while the visitors eat the stuff that he has prepared, Abraham stands nearby, anxiously watching, seeking their approval. Perhaps he's visiting his hands or fidgeting or something like that. Perhaps he's playing it cool but sweating profusely. Or maybe he's nervously chuckling or some other tick like that. It's a bit of a comedic trope. And as the meal goes on, the visitors ask him about his wife, Sarah. That's in verse 9. He doesn't tell them, oh, by the way, my wife, whose name is Sarah, is in the tent. She's out of the scene the whole time. And they said, by the way, how's your wife, Sarah? Where is she? The storyteller uses this detail to point out the fact that Sarah is not in the room, so to speak. Okay? The reason they're asking is so that we know Sarah is elsewhere. She's not standing with Abraham in that moment. She will not hear the promise of a son firsthand from these three visitors. She is out of sight, eavesdropping, listening in. Here is another classic comedic trope: to overhear someone talking about you when they think that you're not listening. It's almost like it's straight out of a Shakespeare play or something like that. I mean, this is in classic literature, right? Shakespeare would have this often. Oh, somebody's not in the scene, but they're eavesdropping, and they maybe overhear a little bit wrong, and that's what creates the comedy, right? Classic literature uses this device all the time. Overhearing something that was not meant for you as a way of moving the story forward. Because also now we've introduced a little bit of conflict that needs to be resolved. Okay, so Sarah wasn't supposed to hear it, but she did. So how is that gonna play out? What will Sarah do with this little tidbit of information that was not meant for her ears? Well, she laughs, right? It's funny. The thing that she hears is funny. And at this point, I feel the need to point out that this is the second time in Genesis that God has made this particular promise that Sarah will have a son. Although the first time Sarah definitely wasn't there to hear it, that's in chapter 17, and we didn't read that part, but in chapter 17 of Genesis, God makes a similar promise to Abraham that his wife Sarah will bear a son. And guess what? He laughs too. He has the exact same reaction. When God tells Abraham and Sarah's not there, he starts laughing. We're old, he says. This is not going to happen. What about Ishmael, my son who I had by Hagar? He's a perfectly good heir. Abraham tries to reason with God. Anyways, the notion is so absurd that Sarah would, in her old age, would bear a son, that she laughs. Although, Genesis says that she laughed to herself. This is in verse 12, okay? Sarah laughs to herself a little bit while she's overhearing. So she has not yet given away herself from her covert listening position. She doesn't interrupt what's happening with laughter because she's just kind of chuckling to herself. It's funny. She laughs to herself because she knows that she is no longer of childbearing years. The literal translation from the Hebrew is that it had ceased to be with Sarah after the manner of women. Okay, that's what the literal Hebrew says. Has ceased to be with Sarah after the manner of women, and so therefore pregnancy was impossible, and she knew that. She also laughs to herself a bit as a dig at her husband, right? In which verse is that here? Verse 12, am I worn out, and though my Lord is old, my husband is old, she's saying, now will I have this pleasure? He's old and I'm supposed to have a child with him? Shall I be fruitful is how some of the English translations are, and shall I have pleasure is some of the English translations. I sometimes wonder when I read this of whether it's the pleasure of finally, having her dream fulfilled of having a male heir, or is it maybe a little bit saucier than that? I don't know. But if it's a comedic story, who knows to say what the Bible is hinting towards with that statement. And now at this point, the Lord, in quotation marks, interjects into the conversation among those men outside. Okay, this is the point where we switch from the voice of one of the visitors to the Lord. Maybe the three visitors reveal their divine nature with this hidden knowledge of Sarah laughing to herself. Or maybe God elsewise reveals it. But at this point, in any case, Sarah is called out for laughing. The finger is pointed. There's a back and forth. Sarah says, "No, I didn't." And the Lord says, "Yes, you did. You did laugh. I heard it. I heard you laugh. What, do you think anything is impossible for God?" We have heard this story of Sarah's laughter. I'm sure this is not the first time we've come across it. Over the years, we've heard this story of Sarah's laughter, and in one reading of it, we just kind of heap shame upon her for disbelief that God can do anything. And therefore, the moral of the story is, well, you better have more faith than Sarah, because God can do the impossible, right? And I'm not so sure, actually, that that's what God is after here. Remember, everything in this story is signaling a comedy. It's like stacking comedic tropes, one on top of the other, as the story goes on. Laughter is the central plot device. And then let's make sure we get to the resolution of the story before we make a judgment on that. Although the way the Bible ended up being compiled, we have to jump forward 3 chapters to chapter 21 to get to the resolution of this story about Sarah laughing. And here in chapter 1, it is made explicit and clear it was God's intention all along to bring laughter. Isaac, the literal translation of Isaac is he laughs. They have the baby and they name it he's laughing, right? If Isaac means, jumping ahead. Isaac is called literally laughter. He laughs because it's a comedic scene. It brings joy. It cracks grins and inserts levity and fun and humor into the way that God works in the world. I think that rather than this story being about a serious God who can't take a joke, we have God not just in on it, but setting the table for laughter. If Isaac means he laughs, then who is laughing now? Is it Abraham laughing that what seemed impossible has come true? He's supposed to be 100 years old when Isaac is born. Is it Sarah laughing that her infertility was reversed? And is her laughter from pure joy at the birth of the child? Or is her laughter from the absurdity of entering into motherhood at the age of 90? Sometimes they say you have to laugh because if you don't, you cry, right? Is that what's happening here? Sarah says in Genesis chapter 1, verse 6, "God has brought me laughter, and everyone who hears about this will laugh with me." It's an infectious kind of laughter. Everyone will join in the comedy that God has orchestrated. The laughter is an expression of joy and subverted expectations and the power of God to do the impossible. I read one reflection of the text this week that stated that this story is for all those who say there is no humor in the Bible. For those people who say there's no humor in the Bible, this is plainly there to say, well, actually, God's making a big joke here. I'm going to close the sermon time with some lines from one of my favorite songwriters, Bruce Cockburn. Bruce has a way of writing about faith that I think preserves awe and mystery or ambiguity in some of the way these wonderfully weird Old Testament stories do. He converted to Christianity as a young adult and felt compelled to write songs about his experience, but didn't really want to be pigeonholed as a Christian singer, lest that limit his audience in one way or another. But for those of us who share his commitment to a life of faith, the shape of that life is all over his work. And the song that I'm going to share with you is called Gifts. It's short, and it's not a radio hit. Bruce Cockburn had a couple songs that played on the radio. This is not one of them. And actually, a song about humor and laughter, it's not particularly peppy either, but we'll get to that in a moment. It's about the way that we respond to God's initiative in our lives and what we will do to carry it forward. The concluding line expresses hope that we can be empowered and encouraged to share our gifts. That's sort of the purpose of receiving this experience of God. And an encounter with the divine starts the ball rolling. For Bruce, the encounter described in this song is with the beauty and awe of the natural world, the sound of falling rain, the glint of sunlight on blue water, a rocky shore softened by moss. The scene evokes peace of heart and stillness of spirit, a quiet space to experience God's presence. And then the next move of the song is that this scene full of God's presence is able to catch all our laughter and send it back without its edge. Send it back without its edge. And laughter without its edge, I think that's a more helpful way to think of how laughter functions in the story of Abraham and Sarah. It's not cruel laughter. It's joyful. It's spontaneous, it's fun, it's humor. It's me standing in my kitchen with maple syrup dripping on my head. It's God's doing. It's built into God's world for our benefit. And I'll play this song. Silver rain sings dancing rhyme, sunlight on blue water, rocky shore grown soft with moss, catches all our laughter and sends it back without its edge to strengthen us anew.